One of the most beautiful things about human psychology is how it stacks up and becomes more complex as we mature. So obviously we all have the most basic needs, like security, shelter, sleep, all of that stuff. And then there's sort of resources, and maybe there's like eventually, there's trade and there's bartering and there's exchange, and then maybe there's a monetary system, and then there's sort of agriculture, and the the collective develops, and with it the individual psyche develops, and the individual psyche reflects the collective, and the collective reflects the individual psyche. Things get more complex. We become civilized, so to speak. We develop a sort of culture rather than just being in tribes. We have systems or institutions, and then naturally from that level of consciousness we go beyond those as we individuate and as we mature. So the systems and institutions that we used to need to build upon our really simple ways then become kind of constraining, and so we break free of them in an almost creative artistic renaissance, like a return to a more humanistic view. You can look at this at like spiral dynamics, Don Beck, Claire Graves, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's many different models that map the human psyche's development, but essentially that hunter-gatherer savage, not to say that hunter-gatherers are savages, I'm just using generalizations, is nested within the next layer. The magical and the mystical is nested within the institution. The institution is nested within the rebellion. So just because you're moving on from one doesn't mean you don't still embody the other. So the reason I'm talking about this is because sometimes when we have a psychological or spiritual or personal development, and we feel like we're evolving to a new level of consciousness and of function and of understanding, we then it's like there's some kind of egotistical trip where we then kind of want to distance ourselves from what came before so that we can make sure that we don't go back there. But I don't think this is really possible. I've seen how it's a natural inclination to want to prove that you have evolved by kind of looking down on your past, but I don't actually think that it's conducive to further evolution. I think we have to love where we've come from, even if we no longer want to be there. Even if we no longer think it's the best way of operating, we have to recognize that, Jack V1 was necessary for Jack V2. And fundamentally, we share the same DNA as our past self. It's just that there's a layer of complexity. So by doing this, we get out of the ego trap of negating the past in order to create a better future. And you see this all the time in the spiritual world. It sounds kind of funny to even talk about. Maybe I'll have to tidy up that language. The spiritual ego, I no longer do that because I'm like all spiritual and I'm always meditating, whatever it is. That becomes something that then has to dissolve. So each part kind of has to be dissolved but reabsorbed back into all of who you are. Another example is okay, I'm a movement therapist. I'm like a movement coach. I work with people's bodies and I help them get pain-free and reduce tension and all that stuff. So for example, with the feet, barefoot minimalistic barefoot shoes are really good for the feet. They strengthen the feet, they mobilize the feet, they spread the toes. And there's a cascade of benefits upstream on the way you balance and organize your posture and the way you run and your gait and all of that. And the sensory inputs to the brain. Anyway, I am still part of a culture where I grew up, and I like Nike trainers, and I know about the fucking sweatshops and stuff. I know that big brands, there are issues with that. I still like Nike trainers. Am I an inconsistent person? Do I contradict myself? From the perspective of one layer of psychological development, yes. In light of the fact that I contain these multitudes that I built upon? No. So I can recommend barefoot minimalistic footwear, and at the same time I can really appreciate a pair of Nike TNs, you know? I can be on the health train and I can still appreciate like a Johnny Walker. And a lot of people struggle with this. They see that as a massive inconsistency, but I see it as a level of robustness in my development, a level of solidarity with past selves, which helps me to integrate parts of me which would otherwise be suppressed or kept in conflict. And the energy that it takes to suppress a part of yourself or to deny a part of yourself is energy which is being stolen from your development. So we need to accept what has been and transmute and transform it, not deny it and hope to transcend it. So there's this level of embodiment of what we truly want, like ownership of the things we truly like, even when we have these like unresolved moral dilemmas about them. Morality itself can consume a lot of energy and can be inefficient, but we choose these inefficiencies. Morality in some ways contradicts nature, and we are of nature, and yet we choose morality, and we talk about it as the human being's higher nature. So within the scope of a psyche, there is such a vast plethora of different viewpoints, perspectives, and experiences that we can have throughout our lifetime. And we can embody so many different characteristics and so many different traits and characters depending on the context we're living in. The context is always changing, and so we're always changing. And this is all I'll really say. I think there is no transcendence without first embodying all that you have been or recognizing how what you've lived through has led you to where you are. There is no integrated wisdom without understanding all of the levels. So like I have to understand my primal nature. I have to understand my attraction to mysticism. I have to understand my need for some kind of like regulation or structural law and order. Maybe I have to understand my need for like a financial system of sorts. I have to understand the convenience that comes with that and how I've based my life in that by doing my online work. I have to understand that that's not all of me and that I'm going to be seeking something more that needs to integrate more of a, a purposeful way of living that's beyond just meeting my own needs. But if I can't do those basic things, if I've tried to skip them, then you can't skip rungs on the ladder. Like if I'm financially insecure or I don't feel physically safe in my body, then I can have access to a higher level of psychological mapping and understanding. But my access to that more like world-centric consciousness, let's call it a more transcendent state, is still going to be colored by the lack occurring at level 1. And this is tricky stuff. The lack that occurred early in life or at level 1 in the most simple ways in your body, in your food, in your sleep, in your social security, in the sense of like your relationships, that can show up as a problem which you then think you need to solve at the institutional level, let's say, or like you think you need to solve it upstream. And so we make these errors of, what's the word? Is it like a categorization error? Is it, we miscategorize the problem and we try to solve things at a level that they don't need to be solved. And we miss where the problem's naturally occurring sometimes. And that's quite tricky. But it's really important to recognize, because if, let's simplify. If you have a biological issue that you try to solve on the level of thinking or like intellectual analysis, it's not going to change your biology that much. Like you can change your mind and you can use sort of that top-down stuff, but like you have basic biological needs. So I actually think that a great deal of psychological expansion also comes from biological expansion. I actually think that the pathway towards enlightenment, so to speak, if we define enlightenment as an ever expansive state of consciousness, an unfolding, a present, like an ongoing transformation, that has to also be biological. And that's what makes it beautifully grounded and also kind of like mystical. So yeah, all of the layers are nested. You kind of need to like accept all of them. And I don't think that accepting all of them is that complicated in practice. I don't think that you have to like sift through the definitions of each layer of your psychological development as mapped by such and such a thinker. I think that like a level of quite ordinary human self-acceptance, like, well, oh well, yep, that's me doing my best. I think sometimes that's all that's required. So that's why I like to make these videos. I like to kind of keep it real. Sometimes I swear, sometimes I'm, I've got like hat hair, like, this, if we meet on that human level, then we can build higher. If the deeper our foundations go, the more profound our peaks and our mountaintops can reach. So that's my thought for tonight. Thank you for watching, and I hope your week is off to a fantastic start. YouTube's evergreen. How good is this? You might be watching this at the end of your week. You might be watching this 5 years from now. Well, all right. Have a good one. I'll speak to you soon.